The call came in the middle of a heat wave. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, sipping iced tea and trying to ignore the hiss of cicadas outside when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me said to answer. "Hello?" I asked. "Is this Miss Ifnu?" The voice on the other end was female, clipped and polite. "This is Diana from the county records office. I'm contacting you regarding the estate of your grandfather, Mr. Harlan Sutcliffe." My throat went dry. "You must be mistaken. I don't have a grandfather by that name." There was a pause. "Actually, you do. Or did. We believe he passed approximately 3 weeks ago." I stared out the kitchen window at the dusty field behind my apartment. "I've never met him." "Yes, we understand that. Mr. Raw, Sutcliffe left you his property in North Hollow County. A farmhouse, some acreage. It's all in your name now." I thought it was a scam, but a follow-up packet arrived 2 days later. Official seals, notarized documents, a map of a town I'd never heard of, and an old photograph. It showed a white farmhouse 2 stories high with ivy crawling up one side. Standing stiffly on the porch was a man with sharp features, heavy brows, and deep-set eyes. My grandfather. I'd never seen him before in my life. The next week, curiosity and the promise of ownership pulled me eastward. I rented a car and drove 6 hours into the countryside. As I left behind highways and shopping centers, the roads narrowed, the trees thickened, and the air grew heavier, like the land itself remembered things. When I finally arrived in North Hollow, the town looked like it had been preserved in amber. Old signage, a gas station that took cash only, a diner with a faded "open" sign flickering above the door. No one smiled, they stared. I stopped at the town hall to confirm the property. The clerk barely looked at me. "Sutcliffe Place?" he muttered. "Thought it'd rot down before anyone came." That should have been a warning. I found the farmhouse down a winding road surrounded by fields and scattered forest. It was still standing. The ivy was thicker now. The porch sagged and the paint was peeling, but the bones of it were solid. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like the house had been waiting. Dust hung in the air like it held its breath. Old wallpaper peeled like curling fingers, but everything was left untouched. Furniture, dishes, even clothes in the closets. He had died here, alone. But the oddest thing was the attic. I found the door to it the first night, in the hallway between the bedrooms. It was locked, not nailed shut, not sealed, locked, from the outside, like something had been kept in. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. I don't scare easily. Not really. I've lived in apartments with thin walls and noisy neighbors, walked home late through cities that never sleep. But the quiet in the house wasn't peaceful. It was too still, too intentional. I kept thinking about the locked attic. Who locked it? Why? The next morning, I made coffee in a percolator I found buried in the back of the kitchen cabinet. The air still smelled faintly of dust and something like old books and dried wood. I opened windows to let the house breathe. Outside, the fields shimmered in the early sun. That's when I saw him. A figure, standing at the edge of the field behind the house, far enough away to be a shape, but close enough that I could tell it was a man. Tall, wearing a hat, just standing, staring at the house. I blinked, looked away for a second. When I turned back, he was gone. I tried to brush it off, my imagination, the sun playing tricks, but I noticed something strange in the grass, a narrow path, like it had been walked over and over again from the woods to the back fence, a trail worn into the earth. Later that day, I went into town for groceries. People stared even harder than before. A man at the gas station said, "You staying at the Sutcliffe place?" When I nodded, he grunted. He used to talk to himself. Yelled at shadows, said there were things in the attic. I didn't answer, just left. That night, I couldn't sleep. The air inside felt thicker, like the walls were closing in. Around 2 a.m., I heard a creak above me, right where the attic would be. A dragging sound. Soft. Slow. Then silence. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the ceiling. It came again. Creak. Creak. Thud. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, crept into the hallway, and stared at the attic door, still locked. But the sound was real. It wasn't rats or raccoons. I knew what those sounded like. This was heavier. Human. The next morning, I found a key in the drawer of a desk in the study. An old brass skeleton key with a smudge of something dark on the edge. I held it in my hand for a long time, debating whether I should even try. Instead, I went outside to clear my head. He was there again. Same man, same distance, watching. I shouted this time. Hey, no response. I walked across the yard toward the edge of the field, but he vanished again. Like mist burned away by the sun. No footprints, no trace. The trail was still there, though. So I followed it. Through the field, over the fence, into the trees. I don't know how long I walked, but at some point I found something strange. An old chair. Wooden. Sitting alone in the middle of the woods, facing the direction of the house. Behind it was a tree marked with deep, claw-like gashes, and something was buried beneath the roots. A jar. Inside the jar was a folded piece of yellowed paper, a lock of hair tied with string, and a photograph of a young boy standing next to the same farmhouse. On the back of the photo, in faint pencil, "Don't let him out. He's still in there." I didn't sleep the night I found the jar. I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching the photograph and the folded paper, staring into the darkened windows like something might look back. And I kept replaying that warning. Don't let him out! The photo had to be from decades ago. The boy in it wasn't my grandfather. He was too young. His hair was light, almost white. I guessed it was from the 1940s or 50s. So who was the boy? And what was still in there? The next day, I called my mother. We hadn't spoken in a few months. Not out of tension, just the usual grown-up distance. When I told her I was at the house of her father, Harlan Sutcliffe, she went quiet. "I don't know much about him," she finally said. "He left before I turned 6. My mom wouldn't talk about it. We always thought he was unstable." Unstable how? There were rumors he was involved in some kind of spiritual group. Local stuff. Folk traditions. She said he locked himself in the attic once for 3 days. Wouldn't come out. Said something answered him. She paused. "You sure you're safe there?" I didn't answer. That afternoon, I stood in front of the attic door for a long time. The key was still in my hand. The air around it felt different. Colder. Like the draft came from behind the door, even though no vents led up there. I unlocked it. The door groaned open. Dust swirled in a long shaft of light from a single round window at the far end. The attic was wide, but low-ceilinged. Boxes and crates lined the walls. At the center of the room sat a wooden chair, not unlike the one I saw in the forest, facing away from the window, toward a large iron mirror. It wasn't a regular mirror. The glass was smoky and streaked, like something once burned too close. Carved into the frame were unfamiliar symbols, shapes that looped and jagged like claw marks. And as I stared at it, my reflection didn't move. I stepped left. It stayed still. When I flinched back, so did it, but a second too late. It was copying me, not mirroring me. I closed the door fast and locked it again. That night, I dreamt of the mirror, of something behind it. I saw my grandfather sitting in that attic chair, facing the glass, muttering. And in the reflection behind him, something darker leaned close, lips moving with his, like it was teaching him. When I woke up, I could still hear whispering. It was coming from above me. Not in words, just sound, like breath passing over the inside of your skull. It gave me a nosebleed. I stumbled downstairs and turned on the kitchen radio, desperate to fill the silence. That's when I noticed the back door was wide open, and someone was in the field again. But this time, he wasn't far. He was standing in the garden, maybe 20 feet from the porch, hat low, hands by his sides. I didn't move. Then I heard it. The screen door creaked behind me. When I turned around, no one was there, but on the floor was a small, curled photo of me, standing in the attic, except I hadn't been back there. And in the mirror behind me, something else was watching. The photo shook in my hands. I kept staring at my own face, frozen in grainy black and white, standing in a room I hadn't returned to, staring at a mirror I hadn't approached again. But what turned my stomach was what stood behind me in the image. Tall, thin, hands draped over the top of the mirror's frame like a marionette resting. Its face was almost human, but not quite. The proportions were wrong, elongated, eyes too far apart, a mouth that seemed blurred in motion, like it was smiling too hard. I burned the photo in the sink. The smell of scorched paper and ancient chemicals clung to the curtains for hours. I left the house. I didn't drive away. Something in me refused to flee, even though my instincts screamed otherwise. Instead, I returned to the woods where I'd found the jar. As I reached the clearing, I saw that the old chair had been moved. It now faced away from the house, and nailed to the tree behind it was a new note. "He fed it. That's why it listens." I turned the note over. In faint writing, barely legible. He made it promises. But when he stopped, it got hungry again. I went back to the house, my pulse in my throat. There were more whispers now. Faint but ever present, like the static of a bad radio signal. If I closed my eyes, I could almost hear sentences. Names. Places. Please. I spent the evening digging through my grandfather's old journals. He kept dozens, hidden in boxes labeled things like crop notes or weather records. But inside were pages and pages of disturbing entries. October 7th, 1972, the mirror called. I only looked for a second. It said it could help. November 12th, I gave it what it wanted. A bird, then a rabbit, then my finger. It healed. It laughed. December 3, it showed me her, my daughter. Said she would suffer if I didn't continue. I did what it asked. December 25, it lied. There were entries that hinted at bargains made, sacrifices offered, first small, then larger. He spoke of an opening in the veil and the mouth behind the glass. He described dreams that bled into waking and shadows that walked in daylight. I remembered my mother's words. He was unstable. But what if he wasn't? What if he was telling the truth? That night, I sat by the attic door again, holding the key in my sweaty palm. I thought of leaving, of abandoning the house and letting it rot like the town wanted. But I knew, in some way, it wouldn't let me. It was tied to me now, through blood, through memory. And then the lights flickered. All of them at once. The radio popped and hissed, blaring static, then a voice, my voice, echoed from the speaker. He let it in. You have to end it. I dropped the radio. It cracked but kept playing, distorted with echo. I unplugged it. It kept going. Upstairs, something began pounding on the attic door. Boom, boom, boom. Not fast, not desperate. Measured, like it knew I was listening. I climbed the stairs, shaking. Stood in front of the door. It shook again. Then, silence. A second later, a voice came through the keyhole. Soft, male. You're her. You're the one. You can finish what he wouldn't. I backed away. My hand brushed something on the floor. Another photo. This one showed a man in the attic chair. Not my grandfather. His face was turned, blurred in motion, screaming. His hands were inside the mirror, being pulled through. I didn't sleep again. How could I? That night, the whispers turned into voices, many, layered over each other. They moved through the rooms like a wind, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes calling me by name. One voice stood out, calm, hoarse, and unmistakably male. You're the last one. You can end this. But you have to finish what he started. I sat in the living room until dawn, my body rigid, heart hammering. When the light finally returned to the sky, I made my choice. I brought the key to the attic door. This time, I opened it slowly. Inside, the light from the round attic window barely reached the corners. Shadows pooled in places they shouldn't have. The iron-framed mirror still stood upright, and the chair, old splintered, waited before it, like a stage. As I stepped inside, the door creaked behind me and closed without my touch. The mirror hummed. I felt it before I heard it. Low, rhythmic, like a distant voice beneath water. I walked to it and stopped just short of seeing my reflection. I turned the chair away from the glass and sat, and I waited. That's when the mirror spoke. Not aloud, not like the voice at the keyhole. This was internal, deep in my skull. He fed me because he feared me. You're not afraid. I felt the air pressure change. My ears popped. Something moved inside the glass. I stood and turned to face it. My reflection stood there, but not me. Her, the one from the photo. She didn't move. Her face looked like mine, but her eyes were wrong. Completely black. She opened her mouth. He let me in. You can let me out. My body stiffened. Cold fingers of fear gripped the base of my spine. But I remembered the journals. I remembered the boy in the photo, the one who warned me not to unlock the door, the one who disappeared. And I remembered something else. The man watching me from the field. Suddenly, the mirror flickered. I saw other faces now, trapped inside it. A woman with her mouth sewn shut, a man missing half his head, a child, arms stretched out, eyes full of pleading. They weren't spirits. They weren't demons. They were memories. People my grandfather had sacrificed in a desperate attempt to appease the thing he summoned. And then, I saw him. My grandfather, or what remained of him, twisted, gray, eyes wide with shame, pressed against the other side of the glass, mouthing, "I'm sorry." I stepped closer. The reflection tried to mimic me again, but it glitched, lagged. I raised my hand slowly, palm out. It twitched to match me, but at the last second I dropped my arm, and it didn't. That's how I knew. It wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a window, a door, and something behind it wanted out. "Why me?" I whispered. The attic shook. "Because he named you in the last breath he had. Your name was the key." Suddenly it all clicked. When my grandfather died alone in this house, his final thoughts were of me, his granddaughter, the one he never met. Maybe he regretted what he'd done. Maybe he hoped I could fix it. Maybe that was his final act of cowardice, passing the burden on. But the thing behind the glass mistook that name as permission. It thought I'd let it free. I stared at it, my heart full of fear and anger. "No," I said aloud. "You don't get out. Not through me." The attic trembled. The glass pulsed. The voices screamed. The thing behind the mirror opened its mouth wide, so wide it split its head. Hands stretched toward me, clawing at the surface. I pulled the chair forward and threw it through the mirror. The sound that followed was impossible. A howl, a thunderclap, a breaking bone. Light burst from the center, flooding the attic in blinding white. The mirror cracked, not just on the surface, but deeply, like something broke inside it. The air went still, and the voices stopped. When I woke up, I was lying on the attic floor. The mirror was in shards. Dust coated the floor. The chair was gone. I descended the stairs like a sleepwalker. Everything was quiet. The house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It was simply a house. I left that day. I didn't look back as I drove down the winding road, but in the rearview mirror as I passed the field, I saw him one last time. The man in the hat. He didn't stare this time. He nodded. And then he was gone. A month later, I sold the house to the county as historical property. I didn't take a dime. I just wanted it left alone. A historian reached out to me, curious about the attic mirror, but I told her the truth had been shattered long before I got there. Sometimes I dream about the man in the field, and sometimes I see my grandfather standing quietly beside him, no longer twisted, no longer tormented, just watching over the house, waiting for it to finally forget.